Welcome to Webinar Wednesday. We are so excited to have Dr. LaValle share his expertise in peptide therapies with us today. Dr. LaValle is an internationally recognized clinical pharmacist, author, and board-certified clinical nutritionist with over 35 years of clinical experience. Dr. LaValle is best known for his expertise in performance health and integrative care, with personally seeing thousands of clients over the years. He has an extensive background in natural products, lifestyle, drug nutrient depletion, and uncovering the underlying metabolic issues that keep people from feeling healthy and vital. He has developed programs for several industries, including fitness, professional sports team, and healthcare companies. Most recently, Jim was appointed as the clinical director of the Pro Football Hall of Fame Performance Health Program. He is the founder of Metabolic Code Enterprises, a cloud-based assessment tool that helps to pinpoint where the metabolic roadblocks are to a person's health based on their system survey, lab markers, biometric, and wearable data. This tool helps prioritize care for individuals using a point system to indicate areas of metabolism that are most out of balance. This platform provides suggestions for dietary supplements, diets, and other targeted lifestyle suggestions with the goal of building metabolic reserve, resiliency, and vitality. Dr. LaValle serves as our clinical academic chair for the upcoming Peptide Module 1 that will be live in Anaheim in September, along with a live Peptides 2, which will be in December in Las Vegas. Thank you so much for being with us today, Dr. LaValle, and please begin when you are ready.
All right, that's great. Thanks a lot, Lindsay. And I'm really excited about pulling together experts from so many different aspects of looking at this whole new topic of not just peptides, but peptides as it relates to aging, and peptides as it relates to telomeres, and peptides as it relates to regenerative medicine. And how do you effectively start to actually plan programs where, peptides can be a component of a complete solution of what the NIH is now calling whole person health, right? So it's really looking at that systems biology approach of knowing when to start with individuals. And I kind of want to, for today, I want to give the rationale of why is it important that peptides are around. We'll go through a list of the peptides that, of course, that we're going to be covering and give you some insights on that, what nutrients, talk about SARMS a little bit. And I think it's up and coming, obviously very new. But at the same time, I think it's important that we get grounded in the issues that we have when we're working with people. And so, the first step is, we're all understanding now that individuals have a chronic inflammatory process going on, and that really what differentiates the individual is what part of your system breaks down. But all of this relates to inflammatory aging, and so it's metabolism-induced inflammation leading to inflammatory aging, which of course is what we consider aging now is a chronic disease, right? Is that, we want to hold those processes off, those changes in signaling that lead us down that path to accelerated aging as long as we can. I firmly believe that, peptides, and let's face it, since insulin was invented, peptides have helped people to regulate their metabolism, right? And there's plenty of drug targets out there on the market now. But I think this evolving field of peptides gives us a powerful tool in that arsenal of saying, how do we help people regulate this process? Obviously, for metaflammation, the classic piece of that is that it's diabetes, it's obesity, it's stress response, it's detoxification issues, it's lipopolysaccharide induced, which is of course the die-off of beneficial flora in the gut. But it becomes increasingly more difficult to help these folks that come to see us that are incredibly inflamed and have very permeable guts and are very reactive and far along their path of neuroinflammation or neurodegeneration. And of course, the comorbidities that occur with metaflammation, everything from damage to DNA methylation, more dyslipidemia, or the bad actor lipids like ox-LDL, apolipoprotein B, the particle size of your lipids, right? Hormone imbalances occur. One of the biggest challenges I see, of course, is that we want to go right to replacement of hormones without maybe understanding that the HPA axis has been altered, and that might be an opportunity for something like a peptide, like samorelin, to help correct that. So kidney disorders, immune dysfunction, sleep problems, obviously cognitive and mood and muscle loss, bone loss. All of these things are cofactors with metaflammation. And guess what? A lot of the peptides that we see being used right now are kind of targeted in these areas. So, the big point to this is that why peptides, I think, become this emerging force is that they're helping us to replace those signals that are lost under the metaflammation construct. So when you think of this, here are all the factors that drive this issue, right? It's pollution. It's people that overexercise. There's certainly some interesting data coming out now on kind of accelerated aging models looking at that people that overtrain, people that undertrain, stress, sleep issues, overeating, undereating. In the end, metabolic inflammation is triggered, leading to this kind of chronic disease process that's non-vector based. And incredibly important for us to be able to redirect people, because let's face it, if we didn't learn anything until this last year, we know that people that are under chronic low-grade inflammation and us being able to regulate the pattern of disruption that they have can help them stay more resilient. There we go. And this is kind of that summary. When you think about peptides, if you've read about them, if you've learned about them already, you're applying them in your practice, you can think of it like, here's how metaflammation is induced, right? You get damaged cell debris. So I don't induce autophagy. I've got all these inflammatory compounds like the NLRP3 inflammasomes or other NLRP inflammasomes, metalloproteinases. You got all these waste compounds that aren't getting cleared out. They can trigger inflammation, right? That's why autophagy or fasting mimicry can be considered to be so important. So that's one. Two, irritant chemicals. Well, that's, pesticides, herbicides, toxic metals, environmental burden. The third, of course, pathogens. And that is everything from biotoxins, mold toxicity, vectors, Lyme-related diseases. It could be intrinsic cell defects. It could be genetic predispositions. But any way it goes, your body turns on this inflammatory signaling from a diverse amount of inputs. And the net of it is that you're supposed to correct this inflammation, and your immune system is supposed to be competent at that. And then it switches off, the inflammation, healing occurs. Well, the problem is, as we age, as we disrupt our signals for homeostasis, now all of a sudden I can't move in that direction. What's the net result of that? Well, sarcopenia, IGF-1 signaling goes down, or loss of growth hormone production. You lose your growth hormone releasing hormone signaling when you get under chronic inflammation. That's an insert opportunity for peptide. Anemias. So as people get metabolically inflamed, they become more anemic. As people get metabolically inflamed, they also make more dyslipidemia, as I said, higher LDL, lower HDL, more ApoB, higher particle number counts, lipoprotein little a shifts, all those types of advanced lipid particle fragments, LPPLA2, you name it. And so all of that being driven by that. Now, what's the next thing that happens? Insulin resistance. So it's the misfiring or the shutting down of insulin receptors due to inflammatory signaling. Well, insert, the opportunity in peptides there. You think of things like liraglutide, right? It's a drug on the market. It's a peptide. But MOTC, certainly a peptide that's out there, it's becoming popular on weight loss, also has a mitochondrial effect on regulating the mitochondria, helps with insulin resistance because it helps to restore insulin receptor vigilance. Bone loss. Bone loss is a byproduct of chronic meta-inflammatory signaling. You upregulate inflammatory cytokines, you increase osteoclast activity, decrease osteocalcin, and now all of a sudden I'm losing bone. But the big ones where the real value hits, because remember, some people are uncoupling their metabolism at a young age. Some people, it's starting to happen as they get older. And so the point of this is that now we get to the right-hand side, which is mitochondrial function. How do we optimize mitochondrial function? How do we look at, senolytics, look at immunosenescence, realizing that as people age, their immune system ages, and that creates less functionality and ability to remain in homeostasis, meaning that I can't turn this inflammation signaling off as easy. Then that means that's going to create damage to the mitochondrial DNA. You're going to see changes in neurogenesis. You're going to see more neuroinflammation. And of course, as that NAD to NADH ratio moves downward, not only do you lose energy in your cell, but that whole unavailability of NAD in your cell means that when you do get exposed to a vector or an inflammatory insult, you don't have the energy potential to drive the enzymes that are responsible for the countermeasures. So I think it's really important to think about, once again, these issues around PEPs and what they can do. Obviously, these key tenets of aging I've already went through. I'm not going to go through those again, but I want you to think of it this way. And this is a great slide for patients, right? Chronic low-grade inflammation plus genetic predisposition equals epigenetics, which is watered by all the pro-inflammatory cytokines that we need to control due to all those different things we just talked about. And then you layer into it lifestyle, not enough sleep, too much alcohol, eating poorly, not enough exercise, too much exercise. And the net of that with aging, of course, as we grow this weed instead of a beautiful flower. And so, you look at immunometabolic impact of metabolic inflammation. And this is why I think peptides can be so important, because I think peptides allow us to restore the signaling that occurs post chronic metaflammation. So when you look at metaflammation triggering nutrient and energy stress and issues, it leads to all these major issues like neurodegeneration, immunologic changes like asthma, even things like colitis, Crohn's, obesity. All these types of disease clusters have very specific immune functions to them. This was in Nature 2017, inflammation, metaflammation in immunometabolic disorders. I don't know how you tear it apart. I always kind of laughed when you used to talk about psychoneuroendocrinology. Well, it's, psychoneuroendocrine, nutritional, hepatic, renal, lymphology, right? I mean, it's all about all these cells are communicating at the same time. And what you're really trying to think about, and which I hope you guys come to the modules, because look, I'm kind of the band leader on this, because I've got people who are brilliant, who have been clinically in practice with peptides, utilize them as just components to what they do, along with PRP, along with other biologics. I'll be able to contribute some of the nutrition aspect to it, as well as what we've done with peptides. But it's really learning everything from the legal side down, so that you can really apply these things. And I think this is where the rubber hits the road, is how we're able to harness the re-regulation and homeostasis of multiple systems in a systems biology process. You read Reckwig's work on homotoxicology from the 1960s, and it was brilliant work. And it's really kind of what we're doing today, is what Dr. Reckwig had talked about. And of course, there's immunosenescence. As we age, our blood composition changes. And so, we have, the ability of your natural killer cells to function, the veracity of your T killer cells. Are you making gamma delta T killer cells as you're aging? And typically that's slowing down. And now you get thymic involution, you have less naive T killer cells. Your memory and effector cells go up, and which triggers inflammation aging, or a low-grade inflammatory aging process. And so our job is to hold this back as long as possible. Now, if you've been doing things like the TrueAge test or any of the other omics clock testing, this can give you an idea of, well, is the program that I'm giving this person turning back that tide? Now, obviously, if you're doing measurements like metalloproteinases and oxidized LDL, and looking at things like glucose and insulin and other inflammatory markers like deoxyguanosine or F2 isoprostanes, turning all those back pretty much means you're turning off inflammation signaling. But these aging clock tests are interesting because they kind of give you an accurate and I think more global look at how the individual is doing. And remember, here's why it's so important. All of you know that as people get under stress, they upregulate their cortisol. And if you look here, this is where we start to get into why peptides have value. Sometimes you give people testosterone, and yet at the same time, they don't get all the full benefit that they could get. You have over here trying to establish, growth hormone releasing hormone, because growth hormone releasing hormone goes down, and now I downregulate growth hormone. Whoop. And so, this is that opportunity on the right-hand side of agents like kisspeptin, right? And over here, ipamorelin, or in the past, tesamorelin or sermorelin, right? So the concept is through allostatic load, which can either be age, physical stress, psychogenic stress, a mechanical stress, anything can push this button to drive people towards shutting down their homeostatic process. And what's the net of it? Insulin action goes down, blood pressure goes up, more endothelial dysfunction, more stiffness in the vessels, abdominal visceral adiposity goes up. So we can look at how we apply peptides as a part of the process of unraveling people who have undergone allostatic load. They've triggered their metabolic syndrome. They've got cognitive decline. They have immunologic compromise, and they're at a fracture risk, and they're at an infectious complication or an infectious risk. We saw this play out in spades over the last year and a half. And you know what? We knew it before that. But now we've got a population of people way more motivated to try to change their lives, which I think is a unique opportunity. And this is just kind of that aspect of understanding that, diurnal cortisol, how do we restore the pattern? Why I think peptides can be important is that they help to restore patterns on how hormones are signaling with each other. And so in this particular study, it just showed that, as the diurnal cortisol pattern was flattened. So if you look here, the area under curve for overall decline in slope with a change in fasting glucose, it suggested a detrimental role of cortisol in contributing to glycemia in individuals. So you flatten your cortisol curve, you lose your circadian rhythm of your hormones. You're not releasing growth hormone anymore. Your insulin receptors are lazy because of inflammatory cytokines like IL-6, causing that insulin receptor to retract. All of those things are contributing to why people gain weight, feel sluggish, and really this, flattening the cortisol curve leads to things like heart disease. And there's the gut as a source of metabolic inflammation. So just realizing that just giving a peptide, hey, I'm just going to give a peptide and repair the gut, not always the whole solution. The reason I bring this up is that, it'll probably take, whether you're doing food elimination, a specialized food plan. Some people like doing FODMAP. Some people like just doing, for us, we start with a modified low carb, low allergen, low lectin diet, anti-inflammatory. Everybody starts at their own place. I get it. But you got to work on that and then work on why did that gut break down. And in addition to that, you can think about adding peptides, such as BPC 157, to be able to heal the gut lining. But, once again, when the gut's compromised, you make more lipopolysaccharide. And what's the net of that? It's just not a problem in the gut. The LPS travels systemically and triggers systemic inflammation. And that means you're going to have a cascade of dysfunction on these signaling compounds called peptides in various systems of the body. And this is just kind of more of the same. I don't want to take up too much time, so I want to leave time for questions, and we got plenty more information to go. But this is just that whole aspect that when the gut gets stressed out, it's going to get more leaky, it's going to get permeable, and you're going to see bacterial translocation, which will lead to low-grade infections or at least chronic inflammation, as well as the development of food intolerances, sensitivities, and allergies. And and this is why it's so important. If you look here, we see this gut permeability changes, we get more toxemia. As gut permeability over here, you get more endotoxemia and septicemia. And all of this, we can really help with signaling from different peptides as a part of a plan. And remember, many times you can try simpler things. And in many cases, people want to jump in. Look, if someone's going through a surgery or the post-surgery, probably giving peptides is going to be a big help healing their tissue no matter what, right? There's single applications where they help no matter what. And then I think there's also more grand applications where you start to look at a systems biology model and think about all the forces that are working on that person and how to strategically apply nutrients, drug therapies, and peptides where appropriate, as well as other therapies. And this is just recognizing that this inflammatory chemistry goes upstream, meaning that the more I trigger these inflammatory compounds and I don't gain control of them, the loss of homeostasis, I induce oxidative stress. And that oxidative stress that leads to that inflammatory state leads to low thyroid function. It inhibits T3. And so, and then what do we think? We think, oh, we're going to give T3 and it's going to fix it. Might help people to feel better some, but the reality is you got to shut down the upstream signaling that's going on. And that's where I think we can see some benefit on peptides. And this is just kind of more of the same with metaflammation and visceral adipose tissue. But if you look at the bottom, we see raising of insulin resistance due to inflammatory compounds, this apoptosis bicapsase A1. This is a byproduct of a cell that has got a chronic inflammatory process that's going on. And there's a lot you can do to help restore that signaling by reducing both the pro-inflammatory response and then looking at how do I turn that insulin receptor back on. And we're going to get to kind of discussion of the peptides now, but this is a simple model, right? There's what happens a lot of times. People think because they've lost some weight, they might be healthy on the outside, but they may not be so healthy on the inside. And that's why we've got to, go through, well, what labs do you look at when you look at, how do you apply peptides? That's going to be in the course during the course of the, those two modules. Looking at labs, looking at biomarkers, looking at advanced labs for real problematic cases. So, Dr. Heyman will do, a metabolomics, transcriptomics talk. But, this is kind of where people were at. They could be eating a high-fat diet. They could have low fiber. They alter their intestinal permeability. Maybe it's just because of stressors. But in the end, they develop endotoxemia, and that endotoxemia leads to endothelial dysfunction. It leads to sympathetic nervous system activation, which then alters growth hormone release and gonadotropin releasing hormone release, which I think is at the top of the list. And then when that starts to go south, now that could be that they have insulin receptor issues for other reasons, but in many cases, people are developing insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes for a decade before it shows up in their blood, right? Why is that? It's because they have chronic low-grade metabolic inflammation and they haven't hit the threshold yet for those receptors to start to be affected. And so, it's this process of understanding, why are you applying things like peptides? It's because our role in helping an individual is to restore their homeostatic response. And it boils down even to the mitochondria, right? So, when you have pro-inflammation, you get more mitochondria stress. those mitochondria can get ragged. You can start to trigger hypoxia-inducible factor 1, which starts to create an immortal, mitochondrial DNA. And that creates a vicious cycle of inflammation and accelerates aging. So if you think about this, let's just look over here at the lower right-hand corner. DNA damage, mutation, and genomic instability occurs due to inflammatory cells looking at neutrophils, looking at macrophages. Here's all of the peroxyl nitrite and peroxide and oxide anions creating 8-deoxyguanosine. And I would look at F2 isoprostanes as well, but this is easy enough to measure. And this is what we're trying to turn back, guys. In the end, where we see a lot of people interested in peptides is the longevity space, but I think we need to think about peptides as this next generation of how we are able to really manage the metabolic homeostasis of an individual. So let's talk about peptides for a few minutes. Obviously, they're short chains of amino acids, typically less than 50 amino acids. They come from the Greek meaning digest, which I think is interesting. Since the 1920s, they've been around. So insulin, a lot of different peptides are out there now, and they're emerging into our medical space. And what's the research around peptides? Once again, I kind of went through this earlier. There's a tremendous amount of research in various areas. But look, what I'm asking all the instructors to do is to give you the down and dirty on each of these peptides. Where's the level of study at? Was it just in animal studies? Are there any human studies? Do we have any collected data? Were there case studies? Where's the rubber hit the road on a particular peptide for a particular situation? I think we'll find that there's plenty of evidence in some situations, not a lot in the other. And then we want to marry that with where we feel like there's safe harbor to be able to do these safely in the state that you're in. So, where's the first step? Well, to me, I think, working with these now for, 5 years or so, maybe 6, this is central. As people age and we help to kind of get that growth hormone releasing hormone signal back, it changes them. They sleep better, they lean out, they feel better, body composition over time, better management of their appetite, all the things that start to kind of fall apart on us as we age. These growth hormone endogenous release supporting compounds are there to help individuals. Now, look, we're not going to go through. I'm giving you the highlights of this because I want to get you to come to the modules, because we're going to go through all these in depth from a bunch of clinicians from a lot of different perspectives, because I think it's important that you get different perspectives from different clinicians who are in the front line that are applying these. And then in addition to that, we get the correct academics, correct researchers, correct legals that help you understand where you're at as well. But there's certainly a lot of different ways that you can support growth hormone releasing hormone. And this is an area that makes sense because when you looked at that endocrinology clinics in metabolism, that chart that I had from 2013, this is one of the primary things that happen when people get under sustained stress and just by the process of aging. So it can have a tremendous benefit. And, once again, you're going to reach for those because you decrease the effect of stress on the HPA axis. That helps to improve sex hormone levels. It supports, your endogenous growth hormone release. Typically it can improve sex drive. It depends on what your, which particular peptides you're using or what the targets are. And then what is the goal? Harmonious metabolic signaling. Get back to how I was releasing these at an earlier age. And of course, this is a little bit more in depth, but, synthetic growth hormone releasing hormone, sermorelin, it's a GHRH that stimulates growth hormone and IGF-1. And then, obviously there's other combinations that you'll learn about during the course of the weekend. I mean, we could spend, if we're going to do an education, you could spend 15 minutes talking about these compounds alone. I'm just giving you a highlight of everything that you're going to learn. Another great example on endocrine restoration, kisspeptin, great at helping with gonadotropin releasing hormone. It really is just exceptional on the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis. And then, helps with improving endogenous testosterone release. So a lot of folks have kind of went to kisspeptin versus, say, HCG. Somebody keeps raising their hand. Let me see. Okay, what I'm going to do is answer these when we get when I get to the end, because there's a bunch of questions, guys. I'll try to rip through them as quick as I can. Obviously, I talked about GHKCU. Now, here's the thing, guys. We're actually going to be doing live demonstrations, especially when you get into module 2. Dr. Joe Cleaver will be doing hair restoration examples. You'll see Dr. Marisol Duque do skin and aesthetics and show pictures of how utilizing peptides with things like hyaluronic acid and PRP, how all those things can be helpful. So very interesting. I think 2 weekends if you join us. And of course, everybody's on to the PT 141 piece, which is driving, sexual desire. Some people tolerate it well, some people don't. To be honest with you, I think it got onto the market and they thought it was going to be a slam dunk, but it's kind of hasn't got the jump that it did. Although there's different novel delivery systems that I think that are going on that I think are pretty interesting for both male and females. I went through there. For some reason, I think that backed that up. So what's another one? Weight management. I got to tell you, I mean, I've had, it was funny. I had somebody on yesterday and I was like, oh, so how are you doing? He goes, well, I've lost 6 pounds of fat, gained about 7 pounds of muscle, did a DEXA, looked really good. I said, well, what do you think changed? He goes, oh, I don't know. I'm not sure. And I said, well, you did start some PEPs, you started some peptide therapy. And he's like, oh, yeah, I guess I did that. I think sometimes it happens so easily that person doesn't even realize it. Now, they still have to watch what they're eating. Of course they do. You need to put them on a diet. You need to maybe give them some chromium and some magnesium. Of course you do. Maybe they need thyroid support. But there are peptides that will jumpstart that mitochondrial capacity for generating energy and burning fat. So from the weight management side, using things like kisspeptin, it helps the HPAT axis. AOD, there's a lot of folks right now that are using MOTC and AOD together. Obviously, AOD is a fragment of growth hormone. The MOTSC is a mitochondrial-derived peptide. It really helps in terms of insulin regulation, which I happen to think is probably the key reason why most people are having trouble losing weight. It's, can I get that insulin receptor to fire again? A lot of people, it hasn't fired because of stress or because of toxicity, chronic inflammation. So as you're getting rid of those kind of sources, MOTC can be incredibly important in terms of regulating muscle and fat physiology. And like I said, you can learn this in depth during the course of the weekend. Cognitive function, right? So many people now complaining of executive function issues. I've got executive burnout. I can't think as clearly. I always do my meetings in the morning now because I'm done after 2 o'clock. It's thinking about, well, what are some of the things that you can utilize that can support people's cognitive well-being? Well, obviously, we'll combine things like synapsin, nasal spray, and honestly, on dihexa, I find some people do great on dihexa, some don't. And what I'll do is ask them, are you finding after 60 days that you're noticing yourself feeling sharper? If they say no, try something different, because some of these peptides aren't cheap. But you'll learn during this that you may need to do a screening for cancer risk in terms of dihexa. There's different aspects of each of these that you would want to consider that you will learn. And of course, in terms of the anti-aging side, I mean, there's so much now looking at glycans and looking at telomeres and measuring telomere length. How do I protect my telomeres? And of course, the European studies on using epitalon that's telomerase protective, and using GHKCU because it helps with wound healing and helps with keeping your collagen synthesis intact. Humanin, which is another mitochondrial derived peptide, which is protective of the cytoplasm, and also it's anti-inflammatory. And so humanin is really an interesting peptide used, I think the research was in Israel. So there's all sorts of application that you can work with on this. And for example, with MATA-C being a peptide that under stress and aging, you are supposed to make MATA-C, but because of alterations or damage to the mitochondria, you may have downregulated your MAT-C. And what MAT-C's response is supposed to be is that it triggers fatty acid oxidation and then mitochondrial vigilance. But if your MATA-C is low, you don't get that. And that means that you get ragged mitochondria and senescence. Guts. I mean, obviously BPC 157 has been around a while. You can use it. You can take it in pill form. Some people inject it for connective tissue issues, but it's one of those compounds that, is a kind of a heal-all piece. A lot of people have found success with this, both orally as well as in an injectable and topically. So BPC 157, something that you'll learn about, is having value for a wide variety of tissues and healing. And then, what about companion supplements? What do you do to support the peptide? And we're going to go through that as well, because I mean, when I first started out teaching about, working with peptides and delivering case studies, which by the way, you're going to have a lot of case studies in both of these modules. I always included this because for me, if you have fertile ground, advanced therapies stick. So it's kind of like when you watch people with stem cells and, people don't change their diet and, they don't really, do things to help themselves. Sometimes it's a 50, 60% hit rate, right? So you want to enhance everything you can do. So diet can have a role. Nutrients can have a role. I mean, learning how to get people to breathe deep again can have a role, right? So we'll go through all of these. What's the role of phosphatidic acid? What's the role of glutamine? How do we help with the support of lean mass regulation? How do we support mitochondrial energy production? And then, of course, just general performance, things like Thai ginseng, which is 5 times more powerful at sirtuin activation than resveratrol is, and supports lean mass. Looking at things like uricoma or KVM, which improves testosterone production, or testofen. All of these things can enhance getting that testosterone back on board. Maybe you've got and you're sitting in front of a male that testosterone therapy isn't working for him. So maybe that's that combination process of, I'm going to try nutrients. I'm going to try understanding the upstream issue of elevated cortisol. And I'm going to try to, reactivate gonadotropin releasing hormone. And then, of course, looking at general metabolism towards healthy estrogens and those kind of things are important. And then stress, it's so important to get people to manage their stress day in and day out, especially after this last year. So knowing how to use compounds like, holy basil, theanine, rhodiola, rhododendron, saffron, all these types of compounds will help with reducing the neuroinflammatory signal that you're trying to put out by using a peptide. You got to get people to calm down, right? And then, of course, there's the immune side where you can use things like nanotized beta-1,3-glucan spray, or you can use plant sterols and sterolins in combination with different peptides that are available right now. TA1 and TB4 looks like they're gone. So there are other peptides that you can utilize to support the immune system, but you got to be smart about it. People get out and they start making wild claims, and that's what gets them in trouble. And now that's the other thing we're going to teach you about, is how not to make wild claims, and talk to the folks that legally are in those meetings with the FDA and understand what really ticks them off, right? That's what you need to learn so that you can be safe in your practice. And so, there's herbs like berberine and cat's claw, et cetera. I do want to kind of get to the end of this because I got, oh my gosh, lots of questions. Cognitive performance, remember alpha GPC, obviously the RG3 ginsenoside. I don't know how you don't use nicotinamide riboside, or if you're doing NAD IVs, I get it. But if you're just trying to get your NAD level up orally, I mean, nicotinamide riboside's got all the data behind it. It works. And why wouldn't you want to feed that if you're trying to restore mitochondrial vigilance in individuals? So we'll go through that in depth. And then the last thing we're going to talk about is a new area during the course of this weekend. And I'm not going to get into this heavy, but we are going to start to talk about SARMS, because you know why? I'll tell you why we're talking about them. I've had 5 people come to me, men, in the last 6 months, that their testosterones were around 90 to 150, and they were under the age of 40. And it's because they were using SARMS, but they were using SARMS inappropriately, and they're buying things online. Who knows what they're getting? But I think it's another emerging area that is probably going to be controversial. But I think if you don't know about these, and you have people coming in that are doing these, you have to understand how to unwind this, and also where they may have benefit. I mean, it's, there are human studies, phase 3 trials. I mean, so just a exploration and discussion of SARMs, because, SARMs basically, act as a selective antigen receptor modifier that, signals the body to make basically muscle tissue, for example. And so where has the research been? So once again, I'm not saying that there are drug therapies out of SARMs, but there's been some pretty significant trials in humans that show that they're able to maintain lean mass, support prostate tissue, research in MS. And remember, where a lot of this is used right now is people in bodybuilding, where they're stacking 2 or 3 or 4 SARMs at once. Now, all of a sudden, their testosterone drops out. And sometimes it can be pretty hard to get back. So you kind of got to understand the chemistry of these things. A couple of the popular SARMs that are out there, Osterin or MK2866, developed in the 1990s, actually was studied in HIV patients and elderly populations to support lean mass. And there were some pretty interesting studies that showed that it indeed did, as in with LGD 4033. So once again, I'm not here saying that this education during our modules is going to be all about, oh my gosh, use SARMs. It's as practitioners, people are buying stuff off the internet all the time. And they're that anti-aging clientele that's also going to show up on your doorstep. And you want to know, if they say, yeah, I use LGD 4033, I use RAD 150, I use RAD 140, I use YZ11, right? You want to at least go, oh, I know what that is. Is that relating to the results I'm seeing in this individual? Because that's where we're at right now with these. So, like, as I said, lots of cautions, a lot of internet products that aren't for human use, only for lab use. Once again, dosage and durations, they're really tricky on people. They should understand that. Where are drug interactions at? Could alter their testosterone levels negatively. And again, not sanctioned at all by athletes. And look, in general, just like there haven't been that many peptides until recent years, these kind of compounds are being looked at for research in drug therapies. Some make it all the way to a drug, some don't. And that's it. So let's stop the share, but let's get on to the questions. 32 questions. That's good. Let me get to the top. Somebody asked if the slides are available after the recording. I'm perfectly fine with sharing the slides as long as you're responsible and don't use the slides. Meaning take them out and make them your own for a presentation. Can you please turn on your camera? I did that. Are you speaking yet? Well, I hope you heard that. Let's keep going. Let's keep going. What is NAD? Nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. Well, that basically is how your body makes energy. So you should know, NAD is essential to energy production within your cell. Things like chronic candida will lower your NAD production, infection, chronic inflammation, any of those things can lower NAD. And some people are doing sub-Q NAD now. Some people are doing IV NAD. Some people are using nicotinamide riboside. Some people are doing all of it. Let's see what else. Can you tell us the difference between a peptide and an exosome? Well, an exosome is a biologic material made from your either umbilical cord or fat tissue or a bone marrow aspirate. So it's kind of your own immune cells and cytokines, whereas a peptide is a signaling compound. You can almost think of it as a compound that's released to make a hormone release. So it's called a signal substance. So there are different categories of biological agents that can be utilized by an individual.
Dr. LaValle, you may be looking at the chat option. I do see 18 questions in the Q&A box.
Okay, well, let me look there. Let me
Sure
see
thing. It'll just be easier for you.
It will. Okay.
Thank you.
No guarantees. Is there a reference we can look at what peptides that are available to be used in the US? You know what? There's no one good one. I know we're working on a handbook. The problem is that it's just not in the US, it's state to state. That's the reason for the Peptide Society. What I really want to do is try to get a forum going where people can understand state to state what is going on, right? Because, we're going to need to mount defenses. We got to make sure that peptides are nominated. So from the US, the FDA's perspective, that there's safety in that. So it's not quite that clear. Now, Jim, can you tell me where I can get peptides here in California, such as TA1, TV4? California is really interesting and very restrictive on peptides, guys. So there are some ways to do that. I would say if you are in the society, you'll be able to, kind of get those kind of informations. I think that, for there's different, I would say, compounding pharmacies that have the ability to get them in through certain mechanisms legally. But I want to leave it down. Anonymous attendee, which labs do I tend to use? Companies that we can mention. I said it'll be more in depth in the course. I mean, look, I get a lot of labs out of LabCorp and Quest. I also use True Diagnostics. I like to find out, any other advanced markers. So I'll use Cleveland Heart Labs. I'll look at things like F2 isoprostanes, 8-deoxyguanosine. So, I mean, most of the labs that we get, I order through, big conventional suppliers. It's just, people don't order them all the time. I am able to get CJC or ipamorelin now for over 6 months. Yep. Which is better to use, CJC with ipamorelin or ipamorelin are separate? If you're able to get CJC with ipamorelin, then them together are great, but that isn't the case. Can we touch on the FDA's current outlook and categorization of prescribing and peptides? I've also heard pharmacies getting in trouble for dispensing some peptides. A4M has removed their list of peptide providers. That's why this is going to IPS. And that's why I am not going to give the legal stance. We've got an attorney who's in the middle of all of it that is going to give, thorough education on that, because that's a complex question somebody asked. A little bit more than what we could just go through here and quickly just say some things. Yes, are pharmacies getting in trouble? Pharmacies are getting in trouble for, sending peptides that they shouldn't. Doctors are getting in trouble for saying, come here and buy this peptide and protect yourself from COVID, right? I mean, or get treated. I mean, all those things, need to be addressed so that if there is going to be a great future in peptides, which there will, because drug therapy is going to latch onto it one way or the other. But for us on that forward edge of using them, we got to be buttoned up about how it's being done. So that's the whole purpose of the Peptide Society, and kind of gathering experts from different aspects of this and then understanding it. What are the highlighted differences in the new peptide modules from the previous? I think it's just a different approach. I think, we're trying to bring in a lot of, I'd say, practical, clinical, but research deep, and really creating that whole person effect. Just like what I said with the NIH, is really trying to understand, how do we look at this beyond just, hey, this peptide does that, and this is how you apply it. It's this peptide does that, and how do you enhance it in the model of metaflammation? Where can we get curcumin spray? That is not going to be available for until about 2 more weeks. But you can check Emerson Ecologics for that. Peptides legal in sports. Oh boy, here's the thing. The peptides in general are not legal in sports. And what happens is people stay in front of it, right? So peptides that aren't being tested for yet, they use. But I know, for example, I got called to being on a case on an NFL guy that got binged for GHRP6 and a metabolite of that. And he said to me, and I didn't give it to him. I mean, he had 31 clean drug tests when he was working with me, but he left and he went to some other practice and he got hit and, lost about $2 million. So in general, I would say, unless you're very daring, that peptides in professional athletes, unless it's approved or you can get away with it in some way, because, they're saying, hey, we don't test for them yet, so therefore it's not on a ban list, right? There's a rationale for that. You have to be very careful about that. Selective antigen receptor modifier is a SARM. Will the FDA allow us to use peptides? The availability is really being limited. Once again, bring in the legal experts, bring in the manufacturing experts, give you guys the information that you need, because I do not have a law degree, and I think we need to hear it from people that are in meetings with the FDA. Where can we order sub-Q NAD? Oh gosh, bunch of independent pharmacies that have 503B or even 503A licenses, I think, can do those as long as they've got sterile. So just look for compounding pharmacists. Can you measure GnRH antagonists in the blood specifically, or do you base all symptoms like ipamorelin? I imagine antagonists. You can't measure the agonist in the blood. California been very rough to work with, 100%. How are peptide viewed in Illinois? I don't know all 50 states. That's why we've got legal. How do you join the Peptide Society? I would contact the folks. Actually, if you want to contact Lindsay, she can get you in touch with Tiffany Duke, because I think Amy is in charge of the IPS. So they'll be able to get you the information for that. Can you utilize BPC paired with VIP? I don't know if they're talking about using that together, like in a nasal spray, or whether it's something separate, but BPC and VIP would make sense, right? Because VIP is down regulating neuroinflammation, stimulating Purkinje fiber, neurogenesis, and BPC also has some of those positive effects. So I don't see a negative to that. Never mind, you did. Okay. Can you talk about your thoughts on the recent popularity of these GL1P agonists? You think there are other peptides that are more effective? I mean, I tell you, I really like ModSC a lot. You should read up on that. Let's see here. What peptides you use to replace BPC and thymosin beta and alpha? AB7, thymulin, those are two good ones. for the TA1 and TB4. What do you think of carnosine? I like carnosine. I mean, it's, beta alanine and carnosine, great. Carnosine's great in terms of, reducing glycosylation. So it's awesome. Is the training different than the SSRP, either or both? Thanks. I'm only going to speak to what we do. I think our training is going to add clinical value for people. And, I'm sure there's other great education out there. I would try to go to education that allows you to get back into the practice on Monday and apply something. And I think just practicality. But look, rising tide floats all boats, guys. Sorry, any Canadian distributors for peptides? There's Canadian pharmacies, but I'm once again, I'm not the legal on it. We'll let the legal answer that. Can peptides be used for IV? I think that's up to doctor specific recommendations and use appropriately. So I think I got all of them, Lindsay.
You did a great job as always. I would like to thank you so much, Dr. LaValle, for sharing your expertise with us today on this very hot topic. We do invite all of our listeners to join us in Anaheim in September. The dates are 9th through the 11th. I have shared with everyone on the call the promo code you can use at checkout, which is webinar 500, and that will allow you $500 off of the registration. Many of you are asking if this recording is available. Yes, we will share that with you. Amy Paoletti has also shared that she will be sharing more information regarding the IPS membership and relationship. So please stay tuned. And we would like to thank all of the listeners for joining us on Webinar Wednesday. We appreciate you joining us each week.
See you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. And we'll see you in September. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.
Please join us. Bye.